She grew up in a small town where the streets were quiet and most of the houses were simple and close together. Life was not always easy for her family. Her parents worked long hours and money was tight. Yet despite the struggles around her, she found joy in the sound of music. From a very young age, she had been drawn to the piano. It wasn't a fancy instrument, far from it. The keyboard she practiced on was old and worn out. Some of the keys stuck, and a few had lost their color. But to her, it was perfect. Every time she pressed a key, it felt like a world opened up, one that belonged only to her. She would sit for hours, fingers dancing over the keys, imagining melodies and harmonies that had never existed before. Sometimes she would close her eyes and just let the music flow, letting her emotions guide her. There were moments when the music made her laugh and moments when it made her cry. Even when her little sister came to sit beside her, asking for stories or attention, she would smile and let her sit, but her mind would always return to the melody she was creating. Music had become her way of speaking when words felt too heavy. Her parents noticed early on that she had a rare gift. They did what they could to encourage her. Her mother would hum along with her when she played, tapping her fingers on the table, and her father would sometimes try to keep rhythm with his old guitar. But lessons, real formal lessons, were out of reach. The town did not have many music teachers, and traveling to the city for classes was expensive. Still, that didn't stop her. She had a hunger to learn that went beyond the circumstances. She spent hours watching old videos online, following tutorials, and copying notes she could barely read at first. Slowly, painfully, she learned the basics. But more than that, she learned to feel the music, to understand its soul. She was not just learning the notes. She was learning life through the piano. When she was sad, she would pour that sadness into minor chords. When she was happy, the keys would sing with bright, joyful sounds. Sometimes she would feel frustrated, especially when she could not get a difficult passage right, but even that frustration became part of her learning. Every mistake was a small teacher whispering lessons she might never have understood otherwise. Her fingers learned to adapt, to find solutions on the spot. Her mind learned patience and persistence. School life was not always easy. She was quiet and often kept to herself, preferring the company of the piano to the chatter of her classmates. Sometimes kids would tease her for being different or for spending so much time alone, but she did not mind. She had learned that happiness could come from within, from the music she carried inside herself. She had a best friend, a gentle soul who understood her. But even that friendship was secondary to the hours she could spend at the keys. She dreamed of the day she might play on a stage, in front of an audience, but that seemed so far away, almost impossible. Her town held an annual music competition, a small event, but it was important. Musicians from nearby areas would come to perform, and a few judges from the city would decide the winners. She had heard stories of people who had studied for years with professional teachers, who played pieces with perfect technique and speed. She knew she could not compete with them in the traditional sense, but she felt that maybe, just maybe, her music had something they did not. Something raw, something real. She practiced day and night, choosing a piece she had composed herself, inspired by the stories her grandmother used to tell her. Each note carried memories of her childhood, of laughter and of tears, of love and of longing. It was personal, intimate, and she hoped that if she played it, people would feel that too. The morning of the competition, she woke up early. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the keys of the small keyboard she had brought for warm-up. She tried to calm herself with deep breaths, repeating to herself that this was just a chance to share her music. Yet, her heart pounded. She wore her favorite dress, simple and neat, her hair tied back so it wouldn't fall into her eyes while she played. Her mother packed a small snack for her and reminded her to eat, though her stomach was full of butterflies. Her father gave her a tight hug and whispered that he was proud of her no matter what happened. Those words gave her strength. She was nervous, yes, but she was not alone. When she arrived at the competition hall, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. The place was bigger than she had imagined, filled with rows of chairs and shiny instruments. Other contestants were there, adjusting their instruments, tuning their voices, practicing scales. She could see the confidence in their movements, the ease in their smiles. Some looked at her curiously, whispering among themselves. She felt small, almost invisible, but she reminded herself that this was her moment to let the music speak. She set her keyboard carefully on the stage, checking that every key worked. She closed her eyes and let her fingers hover over the keys, imagining the piece she had practiced countless times. Her turn came sooner than she expected. She walked to the stage, her small frame casting a shadow under the bright lights. The audience looked at her, some with polite smiles, some with doubt. The judges, a panel of serious-looking people, glanced at her with mild curiosity. She felt the weight of their eyes, the silent expectations. For a brief moment, her hand shook. She remembered her grandmother's words, "Play with your heart, and people will hear the truth." Taking a deep breath, she sat down and pressed the first key. The note rang out, slightly shaky, but steadying as she found her rhythm, as she played. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her like a river. Every note was a word, every chord a sentence, every melody a story. The hall seemed to fade around her. She remembered the rainy afternoons at home, practicing for hours while the thunder rumbled outside. She remembered her father smiling when she finally nailed a difficult passage, and her mother clapping softly for encouragement. She remembered her little sister trying to tap along, giggling at the wrong notes, and the warmth of home that always made her feel safe. All of that came together in the music she was playing now. Some audience members shifted in their seats, unsure what to make of her performance. It was not perfect in the technical sense, not fast, not flashy, not polished, but it was honest. It carried a story, a human story, and even those who didn't know the backstory could feel the emotion. The judges whispered to each other, glancing at her notes, at her posture, at her expression. Her hands moved with confidence now, guided by memory and heart, creating a melody that seemed to rise above the competition. For a moment she felt a freedom she had never felt before, a connection between her and the music that no fear could touch. Then a voice broke the spell. One of the judges, a tall man with a stern face, raised his hand. "Stop," he said sharply. The word echoed in the hall, cutting through the melody like a knife. Her fingers froze mid-air. The music died suddenly, leaving a heavy silence behind. She blinked, confused and embarrassed. Whispers spread through the audience. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. She had been told to stop. How could that be? She had been pouring her heart into every note. The judge stood, frowning, and shook his head. "This piece, it doesn't follow the rules." "You must stop immediately," he said. The words felt heavy, crushing. She wanted to explain, to tell him that this music was hers, that it was personal, that it carried memories and emotions that could not be measured by rules. But her throat was tight. She felt small, defeated, as if the hours, days, and months she had spent practicing had vanished in a single moment. She stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The audience watched in a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Some looked sympathetic, some looked impatient. Her mind raced, thinking of leaving, of going back home and never trying again. But deep down, something inside her refused to give up. After a long pause, she took a tentative breath and softly whispered the beginning of the melody again, almost under her breath, as if the music itself could lift her up. The judge's frown deepened, but she could not stop. She needed to play, even if no one listened. Even if she failed, even if she was scolded. She pressed her fingers to the keys once more, letting the familiar notes flow, letting the story pour out of her. Each sound, each chord, each pause carried everything she had ever felt. And in that moment, she realized that the music belonged to her first, before it belonged to anyone else. The audience grew quiet again, some leaning forward, listening more closely this time. Something in her playing had shifted, a raw emotion that could not be ignored. Her small body seemed to vanish into the melody, and for those who listened carefully, they could feel her heart, her struggles, her dreams. It was more than a competition now. It was a statement, a moment of truth. The young woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and almost silenced, was claiming her space through the music she loved. She played not for the judges, not for the applause, but for herself, the memory of her grandmother, for every small joy and sorrow she had ever known. By the time she finished the piece, the hall was silent, holding its breath. She looked up, uncertain of what would come next. The judge's expression had softened, though his lips were still pressed together. Some audience members whispered, nodding, smiling, or wiping tears from their eyes. She felt a tremor of hope, a spark that maybe, just maybe, the music could speak louder than the rules. She had shown courage, vulnerability, and determination. And in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, a first step into a world where her music could touch others in ways she had only dreamed of. The judge's sharp voice still echoed in her ears as she sat frozen at the keyboard. The hall felt heavier now, the air thicker, as if every sound she made would be judged before it even left her fingers. For a moment, she thought about walking off the stage, about leaving quietly and pretending this never happened. But the music inside her stirred too strongly to be silenced. Her heart beat fast, a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that she could not stop. Not yet. Some people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves. A few glanced at the judge, clearly agreeing with him. But others leaned forward with curiosity, sensing something unusual in the young woman's defiance. She could feel their eyes on her, weighing her next move. She swallowed hard, her hands hovering over the keys, uncertain if they would obey or shake uncontrollably. Her fingers had practiced for countless hours, yet this moment felt different. This moment felt larger than all of her practice, larger than the competition itself. It was a test of her courage, of her belief in her own music. Slowly, almost tentatively, she pressed a single key. The sound was soft, hesitant, but it broke the silence that had settled over the room. She tried to draw strength from that single note, from the rhythm that her heart naturally carried. She remembered her grandmother's gentle voice, guiding her when she was young, telling her that music came from within, not from rules or judgment. She imagined her mother clapping softly, her father smiling proudly, and her little sister giggling in the background. The warmth of home gave her the courage to press another key, and then another, until the melody began to form once more at first. It was quiet, almost a whisper, as if she were afraid to be heard. The judge frowned and shifted in his seat, clearly displeased. He muttered something to the other judges, words she could not catch, but the tone was harsh, judgmental. She felt her hands tremble, but she did not stop. She could feel the music flowing from her soul, pulling her forward. Every note carried her memories, her emotions, her hopes, and even her fears. She had never played for an audience like this before, but she realized something important. The music belonged to her first. It belonged to her heart, and no one could take that away. As she continued, something unexpected began to happen. The hall, which had felt tense and heavy, began to shift. Some audience members leaned in closer, curious to hear the melody that defied the rules. Some whispered to each other, unsure how to respond, but unable to look away. The music seemed to reach them in a way that words could not. Even the other contestants, who had been preparing for their own turns, paused to listen. There was a quiet recognition in the way the notes traveled, a sense that this was not just music played for a trophy, but music that carried truth and feeling. The judge, stern and unyielding at first, began to look uneasy. He had seen many performers, many talented individuals, yet there was something different about her playing. It was not perfect, not polished in the traditional sense, but it was alive. It breathed with human emotion, with a story that could not be ignored. He shifted in his seat, leaning forward slightly, as if trying to understand the source of this strange, compelling melody. His eyes softened for a moment, and she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could hear the story behind the notes. She let herself play more freely now, letting the music carry her. She did not focus on hitting every note perfectly or on following the exact rhythm. Instead, she focused on expressing herself, on letting her memories and feelings guide her fingers. She remembered the rainy afternoons spent practicing at home, the evenings when her parents encouraged her despite their exhaustion, The laughter of her little sister when she tried to imitate her playing. Each memory became a part of the melody, a thread woven into a larger tapestry of sound. The music grew richer, more complex, yet more personal. A few people in the audience began to react, nodding slightly, wiping tears from their eyes, simply closing their eyes to feel the music more deeply. She realized then that this was not just about winning or losing. This was about connection. This was about touching the hearts of others, sharing something that could not be spoken in ordinary words. She felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. The music no longer belonged only to her. It was reaching out, bridging the gap between her small-town life and the wider world beyond. As she reached the middle of the piece, the judge's expression changed again. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a moment of pause that made her pause as well. For a brief second, she wondered if she had done something wrong again, if he would stop her once more. But he remained quiet, leaning forward, listening intently. The other judges exchanged glances, and she could sense that something was shifting. The stern atmosphere that had dominated the room at the beginning of her performance began to soften, replaced by curiosity, by an almost reverent attention. She could feel the room holding its breath, waiting for the next note, the next phrase, the next moment of truth. Her fingers moved faster now, guided by emotion and intuition. She was no longer thinking about rules, about competition, or even about the fear of being stopped. She was thinking only about the music, about the story she wanted to tell. The melody became more fluid, more expressive, carrying joy, sorrow, hope, and longing in equal measure. She remembered how she had stayed up late at night, practicing this piece alone, imagining an audience that would one day hear her heart. And now, here they were, sitting in the hall, listening. She felt a quiet thrill, a deep satisfaction. Knowing that her music was finally reaching out to others, a murmur ran through the audience. A subtle but growing sense of recognition and admiration. Some whispered softly to the person beside them, while others simply listened, absorbed. Even the judge who had stopped her earlier seemed caught in the music. His previous anger replaced by something else, something that hinted at memory, at nostalgia, at recognition. She could not see what exactly it was, but she felt it in the way the room seemed to respond, in the way the air vibrated with emotion. The music had created a bridge between her and every person present, connecting hearts in a way that no words could. As she approached the final section of her piece, she poured everything she had into the keys. Her hands moved with a confidence she had never known, guided not by fear or expectation, but by the deep understanding that this was her story, her truth, and her gift. Every chord resonated with the struggles she had overcome. Every note a tribute to the hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet encouragement of her family. She was no longer just performing. She was living the music, breathing it, sharing it with everyone who would listen. When she finally played the last note, the hall was silent for a long moment. The sound faded, leaving a stillness that felt almost sacred. She opened her eyes slowly, unsure what to expect. The audience was quiet, some with tears glistening in their eyes, others simply staring in stunned silence. The judge sat back, his expression thoughtful, almost reverent. He cleared his throat softly, and for the first time he did not speak in judgment or criticism. Instead, he said something that she could barely believe. "Play it again, from the beginning." Her heart leaped. The request was unexpected, but it carried a promise. It was no longer a demand to stop, no longer a challenge to conform to rules. It was an invitation, a recognition of something she had brought into the room that was larger than herself. She nodded slightly, trying to steady her racing heart, and began the piece again. This time, she played with even more confidence, more freedom, more understanding of the power her music held. She let the melody flow through her, weaving the story of her life, her family, her struggles, and her dreams into every note as she played. She noticed the audience leaning in, listening with intensity, and the other contestants watching with quiet respect. The judge's face had softened completely now, his eyes glistening with emotion as he listened. It was as if the music had unlocked something inside him, something he had not expected to feel in a competition hall. She did not know what memories it stirred or what emotions it awakened, but she felt the weight of their attention, their understanding, and their connection. The music had become a language without words, a bridge between hearts, and she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. By the time she reached the final chords, the hall was transformed. What had begun as a tense, judgment-filled room had become a place of shared emotion, of recognition, of understanding. The melody she had created, nurtured, carried from her small town into this space, had touched people in a way that nothing else could. She played the final notes with a gentle flourish, letting them linger, letting the silence carry the weight of everything she had shared. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of stillness, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the hall. It started with a few people, then grew louder, more heartfelt, more genuine. Some clapped softly, moved by the emotion of the music. Others cheered, unable to contain their admiration. The young woman smiled, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and pride. She had faced judgment, fear, and doubt, and she had not given up. She had played for herself, for her family, for the memories she carried, and in doing so, she had touched the hearts of everyone present, even the judge, who had once stopped her mid-performance, rose from his seat. His expression was one of deep respect, mixed with something else, something personal, something he seemed to recognize but could not yet fully explain. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her courage, her talent, and the truth she had shared through the music. For her, that small gesture meant more than any trophy or prize. It meant that her voice had been heard, that her story had been acknowledged, and that her music had found its way into the hearts of others. In that moment, she realized something powerful. Talent alone was not enough. Courage, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable were just as important. She had faced judgment and nearly been silenced, but she had played anyway, trusting in herself and in the music that had always been her companion. And now, the room was filled with the recognition she had longed for. Not because she followed rules perfectly, but because she had shared a piece of her soul, after the judge asked her to play the piece again. The young woman felt a strange mixture of relief and nervousness. Relief, because this was a second chance, an opportunity to show herself fully. Nervousness, because she knew everyone was now watching her more closely than ever. She took a deep breath, letting it steady her hands and calm her racing heart. Slowly, she placed her fingers on the keys, and as she pressed the first note, she closed her eyes and let the music flow through her. This time, she was not simply performing a composition. She was telling a story, her grandmother's story, and every memory that had shaped her love for music. Each chord carried joy and sorrow, each melody carried longing and hope. She could feel the emotions welling up inside her, threatening to overwhelm her, but she welcomed them. They gave her the strength to play not just with skill, but with heart. She let her fingers dance freely over the keys, improvising small touches here and there, letting the music breathe and grow. The audience had grown silent, watching her with quiet attention. Some leaned forward in their seats, trying to catch every nuance of the melody. Others closed their eyes, letting the music reach them without distraction. The young woman could feel the energy in the room, a tension that was no longer judgment, but anticipation. Every note she played seemed to ripple through the hall, carrying emotion and stirring feelings she had not even known she could awaken in others. The judge, who had once ordered her to stop, sat upright, leaning forward in his chair. Something had shifted in his expression. His eyes, previously stern and critical, now held a look of recognition. He tilted his head slightly, listening more intently, as if each note unlocked a memory from long ago. For a moment it was clear he was no longer judging the performance as part of a competition. He was hearing something deeper, something familiar, something he had not expected to encounter in a small town. Music hall. The young woman felt a subtle change in the atmosphere as well. She could sense that her music was no longer just her own. It was connecting with everyone in the room, touching hearts in ways that words could never describe. Her hands moved faster and more confidently now, guided by instinct and emotion. The melody she had created over countless hours of practice seemed to flow effortlessly, yet it was full of feeling, full of life. She remembered the afternoons spent at home, alone with her keyboard, imagining an audience she might one day face. Now, here they were, and her music was reaching them, crossing invisible boundaries and connecting souls. As she played, Judge leaned back slightly, his expression softening further. A faint smile touched his lips, and his eyes glistened with emotion. It was as if the music had unlocked a door to a memory long forgotten, a melody he had once known but had not heard in many years. The young woman, unaware of the depth of recognition in his eyes, continued to play with all her heart. Every note carried not only her own experiences, but also the stories she had inherited from her family. She poured her grandmother's lessons, her mother's encouragement, and her father's quiet pride into each chord. The audience, sensing the emotional weight of the performance, responded in small but meaningful ways. Some nodded slightly, recognizing the beauty and honesty in the music. Others pressed their hands to their chests, moved by the authenticity of the emotions being shared. Even the other contestants, who had been preparing to play their own pieces, seemed captivated. They were witnessing something re-ran untrained, yet profoundly expressive performance that spoke directly to the heart. The young woman, though focused on her music, could feel the subtle energy flowing from the listeners back to her, reinforcing her confidence and inspiring her to give even more. Halfway through the piece, a memory struck the judge with sudden clarity. He leaned forward again, his frown replaced by an expression of wonder. This melody, though played in her unique style, carried the same rhythm and notes he had once heard as a child. He remembered his mother playing it at home years before, her fingers dancing over the keys, the sound filling their modest living room with warmth. That melody had been a source of comfort, a thread connecting him to family, to love, to a simpler time. And now, here it was again, played by a young woman he had nearly dismissed. His breath caught in his throat, and he sat frozen, unable to look away. The young woman sensed something shift in the judge, though she did not know why. She could feel the weight of the room change, as if a silent understanding had passed between her and someone she had never met before. The music seemed to deepen, richer and more profound, as if it too recognized the moment. She pressed harder on the keys, letting the melody rise and fall like waves, carrying her emotion outward. Every note felt alive, almost as if the piano itself were breathing with her. Audience members began to react more openly now. Some whispered softly, pointing at the young woman, nodding in acknowledgement of the talent and emotion she displayed. Others quietly wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the honesty of the performance. It was clear that this was not merely a competition, not merely a showcase of technical skill. This was music in its purest form, an expression of life, emotion, and memory, conveyed without pretension or artificiality. The young woman, absorbed in her playing, hardly noticed the effect she had on the audience. She was lost in the music, completely immersed in the story she was telling through sound. The judge's recognition grew stronger with each passing note. He remembered the times when he had tried to capture that melody himself, when he had played it for friends or family, hoping to share a piece of his past. He realized that this young woman had somehow found the same tune, unknowingly carrying it forward in her own voice. A smile broke across his face, small at first, then broader, as he recognized the significance. He understood now that her playing was not a violation of rules, but a revival of something beautiful, something timeless, something that connected generations. The young woman, feeling a surge of confidence, allowed herself to improvise slightly. She added subtle variations, soft flourishes, and gentle pauses, giving the music a natural flow that felt spontaneous yet intentional. She was no longer worried about judgment or competition. She played purely for the music itself, for the emotions it carried, and for the invisible connection she felt with those listening. Each note was deliberate, yet free, carrying both her intention and the life she had experienced as the piece approached its conclusion. The audience remained silent, captivated by the power of the performance. Even the other contestants, who had been eager to showcase their own skills, were transfixed, listening with awe and admiration. The young woman felt a sense of accomplishment, not in the form of applause or approval, but in the knowledge that her music had reached others in a profound way. The notes she played were no longer just sounds. They were expressions of her life, her dreams, her struggles, and her triumphs. Finally, she reached the last notes. They lingered in the air, soft and delicate, fading gradually into silence. She lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. The hall was quiet for a long moment, as if everyone was holding their breath, savoring the resonance of what they had just heard. Then, slowly, the audience began to clap. At first, tentative and gentle, and then louder, more heartfelt. Some stood, unable to contain their admiration. Others cheered, moved by the emotion and authenticity of the performance. The young woman smiled, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and quiet pride. The judge remained seated for a moment longer, taking in the final notes. Then he slowly stood and approached the stage. His eyes, still glistening with recognition, met hers. He did not speak at first. Instead, he nodded, a gesture that carried more weight than any words could. It was a sign of acknowledgement, of respect, and of understanding. He understood now that her music was not about technical perfection, but about truth, emotion, and connection. He had almost silenced her. But now he recognized the depth of her talent and the sincerity of her expression. The young woman felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief and pride. She had faced judgment, fear, and doubt, yet she had continued to play. She had trusted her own voice, her own interpretation, and her own heart. And now, that trust had been validated not by rules or awards, but by the recognition of the human spirit, of shared memory, and of emotional truth. She realized that this moment was more important than any trophy or medal. It was a moment of connection, a confirmation that her music had the power to touch hearts, to awaken memories, and to inspire others. The audience continued to applaud, some clapping softly, others more enthusiastically. The energy in the room had shifted completely from tension and judgment to admiration and respect. The young woman felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had stayed true to herself and her music. She had faced the possibility of failure, of being stopped, and yet she had continued, trusting in the melody that had carried her through so many lonely afternoons and quiet nights. That trust had transformed the experience, not only for her but for everyone who had listened. As the applause settled into a gentle murmur, the judge spoke softly, almost reverently. "That melody," he said, "I know it. I heard it years ago from someone very dear to me. I did not expect to hear it again, and certainly not in the way you have played it. Thank you for bringing it back to life." His words carried weight and meaning far beyond what the young woman had anticipated. She understood now that her music had reached deeper than performance or competition. It had touched memory, nostalgia, and emotion, connecting her to someone else's life in an unexpected and powerful way. The young woman smiled, feeling a mixture of awe and gratitude. She had played from her heart, and her music had spoken louder than words ever could. She had faced fear, judgment, and doubt, and had emerged not only intact, but transformed. She had discovered the power of music to connect, to heal, and to inspire. And in that moment, she realized that this was only the beginning of her journey. After the final notes of the melody faded into the air, a heavy silence filled the room. It was not awkward silence, but a quiet pause, like the world was holding its breath. The young woman sat with her hands resting lightly on the keys, her chest heaving slightly from the intensity of her performance. Her heart still raced, and she could feel the lingering vibrations of each chord within her. For the first time, she allowed herself to notice the audience watching her, not with judgment or doubt, but with genuine attention. Some faces glistened with tears, others smiled softly. But all were captivated by what they had just experienced. The judge, who had once scolded her to stop, now stood with a contemplative expression. He slowly walked toward her, each step deliberate, as if the weight of recognition had grounded him in a way he had not felt for many years. When he stopped at the edge of the stage, he did not speak immediately. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of nostalgia, wonder, and a deep, quiet respect. He seemed almost afraid that words might diminish the power of what she had just played. The young woman, though nervous, met his gaze steadily, sensing that something profound had shifted between them. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice soft, almost reverent. "That melody? I know it," he said. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I heard it many years ago. It was taught to me by someone very dear, someone who is no longer here." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotions he felt. The young woman listened closely, her curiosity piqued. She had never expected that her performance would evoke such a response. She had played from her heart, and now she realized that her music had reached deeper than she had imagined. The judge continued, recounting the story behind the melody. "My mother used to play this piece for me when I was a child. She would sit at the piano and let her fingers dance over the keys, filling our small home with warmth and comfort. I learned it from her, and it became a part of my memory, a thread connecting me to her. I never imagined I would hear it again, especially not played with such honesty and emotion by someone I did not know." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The young woman's heart raced as she realized the significance of what she had just played. Her music, inspired by her grandmother's stories and her own experiences, had unexpectedly connected with another person's life in a deeply personal way. The audience listened in rapt attention, sensing the weight of the moment. There was no need for applause or commentary. The room was filled with a shared understanding that something extraordinary had occurred. The young woman felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride, humility, and awe. She had not only played for herself, but had reached into the memories and emotions of another human being, touching something that transcended time and distance. The connection was almost magical, a reminder of the power of music to bridge hearts and lives. The judge, still standing near the stage, looked at her with a newfound respect. "I must apologize," he said, his voice steadying. "I asked you to stop earlier because I thought it did not follow the rules. But I see now that I was wrong. Your music is not just about technical perfection. It is about truth, emotion, and the stories we carry within us. You have reminded me of something precious, something I feared I had lost forever." The young woman nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She understood the depth of his words. Her music had not only spoken for her, but had spoken to him, awakening memories and emotions long forgotten. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed suspended in time, as if the shared experience of the melody had created a space beyond ordinary reality. The young woman felt a sense of connection that she had never experienced before. She realized that music was not just about performance or recognition. It was about sharing pieces of ourselves, our memories, and our emotions, and finding that others could feel them too. The judge's recognition was proof that her music had the power to touch lives in ways she had never imagined. As the silence lingered, the judge began to speak again, recounting more details of his personal connection to the melody. He described how his mother had taught it to children in their neighborhood, how the tune had been passed along quietly, almost invisibly, through generations. He realized that the young woman must have learned it indirectly, perhaps from someone who had carried the melody forward. The thought amazed him. He had not expected that a small-town performer, unknown and untrained, could hold a piece of his own history in her hands and bring it to life with such authenticity. The young woman listened intently, feeling a mixture of surprise and awe. She had never imagined that her music could connect with someone in such a profound way. The realization filled her with a sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of why she played. It was not merely about practice, competitions, or recognition. It was about sharing something meaningful, something that could reach beyond her own life and touch the hearts of others. She felt a renewed sense of determination. Knowing that her music had value far greater than she had ever considered, the judge's demeanor softened further as he spoke. He shared memories of his childhood, of the warmth and love that the melody had brought him, and of the sense of loss he had felt after his mother passed away. Hearing it played again, especially with such emotional depth, was both heartbreaking and healing. He looked at the young woman and said, "You have done something remarkable. You have reminded me of my past, of my family, and of the love that shaped me. That is more than a performance. It is a gift. Young woman felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never thought of her music as a gift beyond herself. She had played because she loved it, because it gave her comfort, because it allowed her to express emotions that words could not capture. Yet here was someone, a stranger, telling her that her playing had meaning far beyond her own life. The realization was overwhelming, but it also filled her with a sense of purpose and pride. She understood that her music had the ability to create connections, to heal, and to inspire, and that knowledge strengthened her resolve to continue her journey. The audience, still quiet, seemed to share in the judge's revelation. Some nodded knowingly while others whispered to one another, recognizing the depth of what had just occurred. The young woman looked around the room, feeling a sense of community she had never expected. She realized that her music had created a shared experience, one that transcended individual stories and connected everyone present through emotion and memory. It was a reminder that art, in any form, had the power to touch lives in ways that words alone could never achieve. The judge stepped back slightly, giving her space, and spoke again. "I want to thank you," he said. "Thank you for reminding me of something I feared was lost. Thank you for showing that true music comes from the heart, not from rules or expectations. And thank you for allowing me to witness a performance that will stay with me forever." His words were sincere and heartfelt, and the young woman felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that this moment, this acknowledgement, was one of the most significant experiences of her life. As the applause began to grow, the young woman allowed herself to smile fully. She had faced doubt, judgment, and fear, yet she had played anyway. Her music had reached others in profound ways, connecting memories, emotions, and hearts across generations. She felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with trophies or awards. It was a deeper, more personal victory, the realization that her music mattered, that her voice could touch lives, and that her passion had the power to create meaningful connections.